Hello there, darlings. Today we are talking about Jinshi, our beloved magistrate. Jinshi is a Spectro Broadblade character who takes on a damage-dealing role. Truth be told, I was hoping for a supportive role for Patch 1.1 characters, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Well, that cannot be helped, so I'm sure you're wondering, how is she exactly? I'll go into her in-depth rotations a little later into the video, but for now, just know that Jinshi is a fully capable damage dealer by herself, with interesting mechanics that may incentivize running a secondary DPS to take the field during her downtime, but more on that later. Let's talk about her basic attacks first. Jinshi's basics are pretty plain and simple. In fact, she doesn't actually use them in actual rotations because her forte overrides her basic attack string when you activate certain conditions. This is similar to somebody like Jian or Encore who override their basic attacks during their ultimate or Resonance Liberation state. Let's talk about her Resonance Liberation next because it's the simplest to get through. Jinshi's Resonance Liberation is a massive nuke that can be cast mid-air similar to Jian, so you will want to use it right after the intro skill. It's just a simple but really big hit that may benefit from liberation damage buffs like those from Jianxin, Yanlin, or Cheng-Li, but more on that later. Let's talk about Jinshi's skill next. Jinshi's skill is one of the most interesting parts of her kit. In fact, it has multiple different forms, but we'll only talk about 3 forms as they are the most relevant. Firstly, the base skill is a dash with a small burst of damage that is on a short cooldown of only 3 seconds. After 5 seconds of Jinshi entering the field for the first time, her skill will change to the second form, called Overflowing Radiance. Upon casting this version of the skill, which is on a 12 seconds cooldown, Jinshi enters the special forte state mentioned earlier called Incarnation. Speaking of Incarnation, Jinshi's basic attacks, heavy attacks, skill, dodge, and dodge counters get overridden in this state, and all attacks can be cast while she's in the air. Some of her animations, in fact, will put her in the air, so that is pretty much necessary. Her special dodge in the state also looks like she's hoverboarding, so that's very fun to look at. Truly a magistrate of all time. Her basic attacks and heavy attacks in this state do a lot more damage, but her basic attack can only be used up to 4 times before this state ends. The basic attack string also does not reset, meaning if you stop or have to dodge midway, you'll pick up from where you left off last time. Basically, you're only ever doing a full N4 attack combo on her in this state. After the 4th basic attack hit, Incarnation ends and gets replaced with Ordination Glow. I know that's a lot of jargon, but the only key difference is that while Jinshi is in Ordination Glow state, her basic attacks turn into heavy attacks requiring stamina, and more importantly, she gains the 3rd form of her skill, Illuminous Epiphany, which does a huge burst of damage. So far, we have ignored one aspect of her kit. Jinshi has a stack mechanic where she gains stacks whenever she or her teammates deal damage. The stack gain is limited to once every 3 seconds when Jinshi is on field, but increases to once every second when Jinshi is off field. The more stacks that Jinshi has before casting her Illuminous Epiphany skill, the more damage the skill does. The stacks are limited by element, however, so if you have Encore on field with Murtafi doing coordinated attacks, you'll only get 1 stack every second, because both of them will be doing fusion damage. If you had Verena on the field instead, you could be gaining 2 stacks every second. But that is all about her stacking mechanic. I guess I can mention that the max stacks that Jinshi can accumulate is 40, but that's not relevant in most cases as you'll hardly go beyond 25 or 30 stacks. I expect that in most teams you'll have closer to 20 stacks on average. Going back to her skill, once you finish casting Illuminous Epiphany, Jinshi gains something called Unison, which basically behaves like a free outro skill and intro skill trigger when you swap out Jinshi. Even if your Concerto gauge is already full, Jinshi will not consume the Concerto energy when swapping, and instead use Unison if she has it. It helps her quick swap playstyle and lets you get more intros and outros than you would normally. This is rather important because remember when I said that the stack gain increases to once per second when Jinshi is off the field? Well, that bonus is actually her outro skill effect. This means that you need to make sure you're triggering outro on Jinshi before swapping so you can effectively build stacks for her with your other characters. And that pretty much covers her entire kit. Let's move on to how you actually play her. You swap into Jinshi with her intro, use your base skill, and cast your Resonance Liberation to get a nice chunk of front-loaded damage. You use your Echo, then basic or dodge counter while you wait for your second skill to appear. Use a skill to enter the Incarnation state. Do 4 basic attacks to leave the state and enter Ordination Glow. If you have stamina, perform 4 additional basic attacks and then activate your third skill to do another chunk of damage. Now Jinshi has Unison and can swap to other party members. She is pretty simple to play and flexible enough that you can also quick swap her with other DPS units, like swapping after the ult and coming back to cast your skill, and so on. Now moving on to her build. Without spoiling too much, the patch 1.1 story will introduce a new boss, and Jinshi will want this boss as a main equipped Echo because it enhances her skill and simply does a lot of damage. If you wish to pre-farm, you can use the Moaning Aches before you farm this new boss and swap out later. She wants the whole 5-piece Celestial or the Spectro set. You want the usual combination of 4-cost crit rate or crit damage, double 3-cost damage percent, or 1 damage percent and 1 attack percent, and lastly, double attack percent for the 1 cost. Jinshi will also likely need a fair bit of ER, close to 150%, so a 3-cost ER main stat is also an option if you cannot get ER subs. I don't blame you. Other than that, focus on crit rate, attack percent and crit damage for the substats. Jinshi's signature is very strong on her, as you would expect. It gets better the more stacks you can accumulate on her since the passive buffs skill damage, but there are other options available too. The free-to-play option is the craftable Broadblade. It gives ER that she very much needs and quite a bit of attack too. If you happen to have Jiyan's signature weapon, it is also very close to her own signature, so you can just use that. The standard 5-star Broadblade and the Battle Pass Broadblade are competitive with each other. If you want to know if you should get the Broadblade from the weapon selector box, I would say no. It's just not big enough of an improvement over the craftable, in my opinion, to warrant losing out on the stat stick that is the standard 5-star sword. Just get the sword instead. Now, moving on to the teams. Team analysis is early and things will likely change once she's out and we can test her synergy with different units more closely, but she seems rather flexible with her choices thus far. She can slot in dedicated supports like Jianshin or Tao Chi to help her damage, or sub-DPSs such as Murtafi or Yinlin that both buff her a little and have respectable personal damage on their own. More interesting to me are the dual DPS setups where you play another on-fielder like Encore or Shangli with her. These teams are competitive with the others in terms of DPS but tend to have higher DPR and longer rotations, which can be a good and a bad thing. On one hand, you get more freedom in terms of finding damage windows, and in terms of gameplay, it might feel less monotonous. But on the other hand, with larger rotation lengths, if you cannot quick swap abilities, there's a chance you're losing out on the potential damage if you don't use your skills off cooldown. But regardless, I think dual DPS setups with Jinshi are going to be rather popular, and I'll be experimenting with them when she's out. The takeaway here is that she's highly flexible, and a lot of teammates will work for her. She doesn't have one support that she's tied to, other than Verena, I suppose, who everyone is tied to theoretically. And finally, the question everybody has in their minds: is Jinshi good? Jinshi has really good damage for her field time and has multiple instances of big hits. I expect her to feel extremely good to play and have a lot of people thinking she is a must-pull. I wouldn't go that far myself. To me, she's a very fun character with massive potential to do well, especially this early in the game's life cycle. I expect her only to get better. I'd say she's a great pull for every account. She has very few, if any, caveats. And that's it for today's guide. If you liked it, you may as well consider subscribing. Until next time.